A single warning cost a CEO $2 billion and exposed the deadly price of silencing black voices in Silicon Valley. Have you ever been the only person willing to speak up when everyone else stayed silent? Have you felt the weight of knowing something terrible could happen while those in power refuse to listen? That crushing isolation when your expertise is dismissed simply because of who you are. This is the story of Dr. Nia Calloway, a brilliant MIT-trained AI engineer whose desperate warnings about a fatal flaw in self-driving car technology were ignored, dismissed, and ultimately cost her everything. But her prediction would prove devastatingly accurate in the most tragic way possible. In the gleaming towers of Silicon Valley, where innovation meets astronomical profits, the race to dominate the self-driving car market has become a high-stakes game of corporate chess. Companies promise revolutionary safety, revolutionary efficiency, revolutionary everything. But what happens when the revolution is built on a lie? ElectraDrive was the golden child of autonomous vehicles, a company valued in the tens of billions, led by a charismatic CEO who made bold promises to change the world. Their flagship product, the Electra One, was marketed as the safest self-driving car ever created. Wall Street loved them. The media praised them. Investors threw money at them. But Dr. Nia Calloway saw what others refused to see. Deep in the code, buried in the sensor arrays, hidden in the testing data that executives didn't want to examine too closely, she discovered a flaw so dangerous it made her blood run cold. Under specific conditions, the exact conditions that had already killed people in similar vehicles, the Electra One would fail catastrophically. She tried to warn them. She prepared detailed reports. She presented irrefutable evidence. She pleaded with leadership to delay the launch and fix the problem. They fired her instead. Months later, on a California highway, her worst nightmare became reality. The crash was horrific. Multiple people died, and in a single trading day, ElectraDrive lost $2 billion in market value as the truth finally came to light. This is more than just a story about corporate greed or technological failure. This is about the systematic silencing of black women in tech, the deadly consequences of refusing to listen to inconvenient truths, and how one woman's courage to speak up, even when it destroyed her career, ultimately saved countless lives. If stories of courage in the face of injustice inspire you, hit that like button. Because what you're about to hear will change how you think about who gets heard in America's boardrooms. Dr. Nia Calloway wasn't supposed to make it this far. Born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1985, she grew up in a world where her grandmother still carried scars from the civil rights battles of the 1960s. Her neighborhood bore witness to decades of systemic inequality, where brilliant minds were often overlooked simply because of the color of their skin. But Nia's mother, a high school math teacher, refused to let her daughter's potential be wasted. Technology, her mother would say, is the great equalizer. Master it, and you can change the world. Those words became Nia's North Star. She excelled in mathematics and computer science, earning a full scholarship to MIT, where she pursued a PhD in artificial intelligence with a specialty in safety systems. While her classmates focused on making algorithms faster or more profitable, Nia obsessed over making them safer. She understood something her privileged peers often missed. When technology fails, it's the most vulnerable communities that suffer first and worst. Her doctoral thesis on algorithmic bias in critical safety systems earned her recognition as one of the most promising young researchers in AI ethics. She published groundbreaking papers on how unconscious bias in training data could lead to life-threatening failures in autonomous systems. Her work wasn't just academic theory. It was born from lived experience of being consistently underestimated and overlooked. Silicon Valley recruited her aggressively. ElectraDrive offered her the position of head of autonomous safety analytics, a role that put her in charge of ensuring their self-driving cars wouldn't kill people. At 33, she was the youngest department head in company history and one of only 3 black women in senior leadership across the entire organization. The weight of that responsibility was immense. Every line of code she reviewed, every test scenario she designed, every safety protocol she implemented could mean the difference between a family arriving home safely or never arriving at all. She knew that margin for error in her world was measured not in dollars lost, but in lives destroyed. Her team respected her immediately. Her technical brilliance was undeniable. She could spot flaws in complex algorithms that other engineers missed entirely. More importantly, she brought a perspective that the predominantly white, male engineering culture desperately needed. She asked different questions. What happens in neighborhoods with poor lighting? How does this perform for pedestrians? The system wasn't trained to recognize. What are the failure modes we're not considering? But leadership saw her differently. Where her team saw thoroughness, executives saw obstruction. Where she demonstrated critical thinking, they perceived negativity. Where she identified potential catastrophes, they saw someone standing in the way of profit margins and launch deadlines. The disconnect was jarring. Here was a woman with credentials that outshined most of her colleagues, an MIT PhD, published researcher, recognized expert in AI safety, yet her warnings were consistently dismissed as overthinking or pessimistic forecasting. The irony was cruel. They hired her specifically for her expertise in preventing autonomous vehicle disasters, then ignored her when she tried to prevent exactly that. This treatment wasn't unique to Nia. Across Silicon Valley, brilliant black women found themselves in similar positions, recruited for their exceptional talents, then marginalized when they dared to use them. Drop a comment if you've ever felt your expertise was dismissed because of who you are. Because Nia's story is about to take a turn that would prove just how costly that dismissal could be. It started with a single test run that shouldn't have failed. Nia was conducting routine validation tests on the Electra One's autopilot system when she noticed something troubling in the data logs. During a simulated highway scenario at 70 miles per hour in low-light conditions, the vehicle's sensor array had momentarily lost a stationary object directly ahead. For 2.3 seconds, the car's AI essentially became blind. 2.3 seconds doesn't sound like much. But at highway speeds, that's enough time to travel over 200 feet, more than enough distance to turn a routine commute into a deadly collision. She ran the test again. Same result. Her stomach dropped. Nia immediately pulled up the technical specifications for the Electra One's sensor configuration. The vehicle relied on a combination of cameras, LiDAR, and radar to create a 360-degree understanding of its environment. But the cameras struggled in low-light conditions. The LiDAR had blind spots at certain angles, and the radar sometimes failed to distinguish between moving and stationary objects. Most concerning was how the AI processed this contradictory information. When the sensors disagreed, the system defaulted to the most confident reading, often the wrong one. She began running systematic tests across hundreds of scenarios. Highway driving at dusk, rainy conditions with poor visibility, construction zones with unexpected obstacles. The pattern became undeniable. In approximately 0.3% of high-speed, low-visibility situations, the Electra One would fail to detect stationary hazards in time to prevent catastrophic impact. 0.3% might seem small, but Nia did the math. With millions of vehicles planned for production, that translated to thousands of potential fatal accidents. Worse, she recognized this exact failure mode. Tesla's autopilot system had experienced similar incidents, highly publicized crashes where vehicles slammed into stationary emergency vehicles, concrete barriers, and disabled cars. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration had investigated multiple cases where Tesla's technology failed under remarkably similar circumstances. Electra Drive was about to repeat Tesla's most deadly mistakes. Nia documented everything meticulously. She created detailed technical reports showing exactly how the sensor fusion algorithm failed. She produced video simulations demonstrating the blind spots in various lighting conditions. She compiled statistical analyses proving the failure rate was unacceptably high for a system marketed as revolutionary safety technology. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and terrifying. But presenting this data meant challenging the company's entire timeline. The Electra One was scheduled to launch in 6 months, with pre-orders already exceeding 50,000 vehicles. Marketing campaigns were running, production lines were ramping up. Investors were expecting returns on billions in development costs. Nia found herself facing an impossible choice. She could stay quiet, keep her job, and hope someone else would catch the problem. The safer career move would be to raise concerns quietly through internal channels, document her due diligence, and let leadership make the final decision. After all, she was just one voice among hundreds of engineers. Or she could sound the alarm as loudly as possible, knowing it would likely end her career at Electrodrive and potentially blacklist her from the entire industry. Late one evening, staring at her computer screen filled with test data that screamed danger, Nia made her decision. On her desk sat a photo of her young niece and nephew, kids who would be learning to drive in a world filled with autonomous vehicles. She thought about her grandmother's stories of courage during the civil rights movement, of standing up when standing up meant losing everything. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Another Tesla autopilot fatality, the third that month. A 38-year-old father of two had crashed into a disabled vehicle on a California freeway. The circumstances were identical to what she was seeing in her test data. That's when it hit her with crushing clarity. This wasn't about corporate politics or career advancement. Real people would die. Families would be destroyed. And she was potentially the only person in the world who could prevent it. The weight of that realization changed everything. Nia spent 3 sleepless nights preparing for the most important presentation of her career. She knew she would have exactly 15 minutes to convince a room full of executives and investors that their billion-dollar launch needed to be delayed. 15 minutes to explain why their revolutionary technology was actually a ticking time bomb. 15 minutes to save lives while potentially destroying her own career. Her presentation was flawless. Every slide was carefully crafted, every statistic verified, every simulation video crystal clear. She practiced her delivery until she could recite the technical details without notes, knowing that any hesitation would be seized upon as uncertainty. The boardroom on the 47th floor was exactly what she expected, all glass and chrome, designed to intimidate. Around the mahogany conference table sat 12 people who controlled Electrodrive's future. 8 white men in identical navy suits, 2 white women, 1 Asian man, and Victor Lang himself at the head of the table. Nia was the only black person in the room. She could feel their skepticism before she even began speaking. "Thank you for your time," Nia started, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've identified a critical safety flaw in the Electra 1 that requires immediate attention before launch." She walked them through her findings methodically. The sensor fusion failures, the statistical analysis showing unacceptable risk rates, the video simulations demonstrating exactly how the system would fail. Most damning of all, she showed documented cases of identical failures in Tesla's autopilot system that had already killed multiple people. Under specific but common highway conditions, she concluded, our vehicle will fail to detect stationary obstacles with sufficient time to prevent fatal collisions. The data is unambiguous. The silence that followed was deafening. For nearly 30 seconds, no one spoke. The executives exchanged glances, shifted in their chairs, and studied their tablets. Nia could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, Victor Lang leaned back in his chair, a thin smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Dr. Calloway," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I appreciate your thoroughness, but let's put this in perspective. You're talking about a 0.3% failure rate in very specific scenarios. That's actually better than human drivers. Sir, with respect, human drivers don't market themselves as infallible safety systems. We're promising innovation," Lang interrupted, his smile fading. "We're promising to disrupt an industry that kills 38,000 Americans every year. Your concerns, while noted, seem to reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of acceptable risk in breakthrough technology." The coded language was unmistakable. Thoroughness meant obsessive. Concerns meant overreaction. Fundamental misunderstanding meant she simply wasn't smart enough to grasp the bigger picture. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. The CFO mentioned the $500 million in pre-orders. The VP of Marketing discussed the competitive advantage of being first to market. The head of Investor Relations talked about quarterly projections and stock prices. Not one person addressed the fact that people would die. "Dr. Calloway," Lang continued, "perhaps you're not the right fit for our forward-thinking culture. We need team players who understand that innovation requires bold decisions, not endless second-guessing. The threat was crystal clear. Agree with us, or find another job. Nia felt the walls closing in. Every instinct told her to back down, apologize, and find a way to compromise. She thought about her student loans, her mortgage, her mother who was so proud of her success. But she also thought about that Tesla crash victim, that father of two who never made it home. I understand the business pressures, she said carefully. But I cannot in good conscience recommend proceeding with the current system. The risk to human life is too great. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lang's expression hardened. Thank you, Dr. Calloway. We'll take your input under advisement. She knew, walking out of that room, that her time at Electra Drive was over. 3 days after her presentation, Nia received an email that would destroy everything she had worked for. Dr. Calloway, please report to Human Resources at 9 a.m. sharp. Regards, Jennifer Walsh, VP of Human Resources. The message was clinical, cold, and ominous. Nia had worked in corporate America long enough to know that urgent HR meetings rarely ended well. She arrived at the sterile conference room to find 3 people waiting: Jennifer Walsh, a company attorney, and David Klein, Victor Lang's chief of staff. No pleasantries. No small talk. Just a manila folder and a look that said her fate was already sealed. Dr. Calloway, Walsh began, reading from prepared notes, we've received multiple reports about your negative impact on team morale and company culture. Your recent presentation has been characterized as unnecessarily alarmist and damaging to employee confidence. The words hit like physical blows. Negative impact, code for uppity. Alarmist, code for emotional woman. Damaging to confidence, code for disruptive troublemaker who doesn't know her place. Your approach is incompatible with Electra Drive's innovative, forward-focused vision, the attorney added. We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately. Incompatible. The word echoed in Nia's mind. She thought about her MIT PhD, her published research, her years of expertise. None of it mattered when she became inconvenient. On what grounds? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Restructuring, Klein replied smoothly. Your position is being eliminated. It was a lie, and everyone in the room knew it. Her team would remain intact, her responsibilities redistributed. She was being erased, not restructured. The security guard arrived before she could fully process what was happening. Her badge was confiscated, her laptop confiscated, her access to 17 years of professional relationships severed in 17 minutes. She was escorted through the lobby like a criminal while former colleagues averted their eyes. The character assassination began immediately. Within hours, carefully crafted leaks painted her as a disgruntled employee who had clashed with leadership over strategic direction. Trade publications ran stories about internal disagreements and philosophical differences. Her LinkedIn was flooded with messages from recruiters suddenly going dark. The industry blacklist was swift and surgical. Job interviews that had been scheduled were mysteriously canceled. Contacts who had been eager to work with her stopped returning calls. The message was clear. Hiring Nia Calloway meant crossing Electra Drive and their powerful network of investors and partners. Her former colleagues were caught between fear and loyalty. Publicly, they maintained silence, afraid of becoming the next target. But privately, the messages poured in. We know you were right. This is so wrong. I wanted to speak up, but couldn't risk my job. You're braver than all of us. The isolation was crushing. Nia had spent decades building her professional identity, only to watch it get dismantled in days. The woman who had been invited to speak at AI conferences suddenly couldn't get a callback for entry-level positions. The expert who had published groundbreaking research was being painted as incompetent. Late at night, scrolling through job postings that led nowhere, Nia wondered if speaking up had been worth it. The system had worked exactly as designed. The inconvenient voice had been silenced, the threat to profits eliminated. Have you witnessed workplace retaliation? Share your thoughts below. Because this story was far from over. 4 months after Nia's termination, her worst nightmare became reality on Interstate 405 outside Los Angeles. It was 7:23 p.m. on a Tuesday evening when Marcus Williams, a 34-year-old teacher, driving home from his daughter's soccer practice, experienced mechanical failure on the busy freeway. His pickup truck stalled in the right lane, hazard lights blinking desperately in the growing dusk. Traffic was heavy but moving at 65 miles per hour. Behind him, approaching at highway speed, was an Electra 1 operating in full autonomous mode. The sequence of events unfolded exactly as Nia had predicted in her dismissed presentation. The twilight conditions confused the vehicle's camera system. The LiDAR struggled to distinguish the stationary truck from moving traffic patterns. The radar detected an object but classified it as moving at highway speed rather than completely stopped. For 2.7 seconds, just slightly longer than Nia's worst-case scenario, the Electra 1's AI system lost track of the disabled truck entirely. At 65 miles per hour, those seconds were fatal. The autonomous vehicle slammed into Marcus Williams' truck at full speed, triggering a chain reaction that involved 6 other vehicles. Marcus died instantly. The Electra 1's passengers, a young couple celebrating their anniversary, were critically injured. A family of 4 in the subsequent collision suffered severe trauma that would change their lives forever. The crash made national headlines within hours. Video footage from traffic cameras showed the Electra 1 making no attempt to brake or swerve. To viewers, it looked like the car had simply chosen to drive directly into an obviously disabled vehicle. Social media exploded with questions about autonomous vehicle safety. News stations ran constant coverage of the robot car death crash. Electra Drive's stock price opened the next morning down 15%. By lunch, it had fallen 31%. When trading closed, the company had lost $2.1 billion in market value, more money than most countries' entire GDP. Victor Lang called an emergency press conference, his earlier confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. Gone was the smooth Silicon Valley swagger. Standing at a podium flanked by lawyers and crisis management consultants, he looked like a man watching his empire collapse in real time. "This was a tragic accident," he stammered, sweat visible on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Our preliminary investigation suggests multiple contributing factors, including unusual road conditions and..." The questions from reporters were brutal. "Mr. Lang, were you aware of internal safety concerns about this exact scenario? Did employees warn about sensor fusion problems? Why did your company ignore known issues with stationary object detection?" Lang's answers became increasingly desperate. He blamed the victim's vehicle for inadequate hazard lighting. He suggested the other drivers were at fault for not maintaining safe distances. He even hinted that regulatory agencies had approved the technology, attempting to shift responsibility to government oversight. None of it worked. Within days, investigators obtained internal documents through legal discovery. Nia's presentation, her detailed warnings, her statistical analyses, everything Lang had dismissed as overly cautious pessimism was now front-page news. Her predictions weren't just accurate, they were precise down to the specific failure conditions. The contrast was devastating. Video footage from the original boardroom meeting showed Lang confidently dismissing her concerns while surrounded by nodding executives. Now, in congressional hearing rooms, those same executives sat silent and pale-faced as lawmakers read Nia's warnings aloud. Dr. Calloway warned that the vehicle would fail to detect stationary obstacles with sufficient time to prevent fatal collisions, Congresswoman Maria Santos stated during televised hearings. She provided specific data about failure rates in low-light highway conditions. She even referenced similar Tesla incidents as precedent. "How do you explain your decision to ignore this expert analysis?" Lang's response was painful to watch. "We believed our testing was adequate. We trusted our engineering teams. We never intended." "But Dr. Calloway wasn't just any engineering team member," Santos interrupted. "She was your head of autonomous safety analytics. You hired her specifically for her expertise in preventing exactly this type of disaster. Then you fired her for trying to prevent it." The irony was crushing. Nia's voice, which had been systematically silenced and discredited, was now the most important voice in the entire automotive industry. Her fired employee status transformed overnight into whistleblower credibility. Every word of her dismissed presentation was being analyzed by safety experts, quoted by lawmakers, and cited in wrongful death lawsuits. The woman they tried to erase had become impossible to ignore. Nia's story wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a documented pattern that has cost the tech industry billions and society countless innovations. The numbers tell a stark story. Black women make up less than 3% of the technical workforce at major tech companies, despite representing 7% of the general population. More troubling, they leave tech at twice the rate of their white male counterparts, often citing hostile work environments and systematic dismissal of their contributions. Dr. Ayodele Mensah experienced this firsthand at a major social media platform. As a machine learning specialist, she identified algorithmic bias that was systematically suppressing content from Black creators, costing the company millions in advertising revenue and driving away users. Her detailed analysis showed how the recommendation algorithm had been trained on data that reflected historical discrimination patterns. When she presented her findings, leadership questioned her methodology, suggested she was seeing bias where none existed, and ultimately restructured her team to remove her influence. 6 months later, a whistleblower leak exposed the same bias she had identified, leading to congressional investigations and a $50 million settlement with affected creators. Simone Rivers faced similar dismissal when she discovered critical safety flaws in medical monitoring devices at a leading healthcare technology company. Her analysis showed that the devices failed to accurately read vital signs on darker skin tones, a potentially fatal oversight that could affect millions of patients. Her warnings were labeled politically motivated, and her position was eliminated during the next reorganization. The pattern is consistent and predictable. Black women in tech face what researchers call intersectional invisibility. Their gender makes them targets for sexism, their race makes them targets for racism, and the combination creates unique forms of discrimination that compound both. Their expertise is questioned differently. Where white male colleagues are seen as thorough, Black women are labeled difficult. Where men are viewed as passionate about quality, Black women are dismissed as negative or not team players. Their concerns about safety, bias, or ethical implications are reframed as personal failings rather than professional insights. This systematic silencing has catastrophic consequences beyond individual careers. Research consistently shows that diverse teams identify risks and blind spots that homogeneous groups miss entirely. When companies silence these voices, they lose critical perspectives that could prevent disasters. Consider the innovation we've lost. How many algorithmic biases could have been prevented if Black women's warnings had been heeded? How many safety flaws could have been caught before they killed people? How many billion-dollar mistakes could have been avoided if leadership had listened to inconvenient truths? The tech industry prides itself on disruption and innovation, yet it consistently rejects the most disruptive voices of all, those who challenge fundamental assumptions about how technology affects different communities. Black women bring lived experience of being overlooked, underestimated, and systematically excluded. That perspective is precisely what's needed to build technology that works for everyone, not just privileged demographics. When companies silence these voices, they don't just lose talented employees. They lose the ability to see their own blind spots, anticipate their own failures, and serve their own customers effectively. The cost isn't just measured in lost careers or hurt feelings. It's measured in lives lost, communities harmed, and innovations that never happened because the people who could have created them were pushed out before they could contribute. The vindication changed everything for Nia, but not in the way she expected. While lawyers fought over billion-dollar settlements and politicians demanded reform, Nia found herself at a crossroads. She could have returned to the corporate world as a celebrated whistleblower, commanding top salaries and consulting fees. Silicon Valley loves a redemption story, especially one with clear heroes and villains. Instead, she chose a different path. The congressional hearings had connected her with other women who shared similar experiences. Dr. Ayodele Mensah reached out first, followed by Simone Rivers, then dozens of others. Each had been pushed out, silenced, or marginalized for raising inconvenient truths about technology's potential harms. Their stories were remarkably consistent: brilliant women identifying serious problems, being dismissed or punished for speaking up, then watching their predictions come true months or years later. Together, they realized they weren't isolated cases. They were part of a systematic problem that needed systematic solutions. Naya began speaking publicly about her experience, but with a broader message that transcended her individual story. At the National Conference on AI Ethics, she delivered a speech that would become her defining moment. Integrity must be the cornerstone of technological advancement. When we silence voices that challenge our assumptions, we don't just harm individuals, we create blind spots that kill people. Technology isn't neutral. It reflects the values and perspectives of those who build it. If we want technology that serves everyone, we need everyone's voice in the room. The response was overwhelming. Universities invited her to lecture, regulatory agencies sought her expertise, international conferences featured her as a keynote speaker. But most importantly, young engineers, particularly women and minorities, began reaching out for guidance. The Distributed AI Research Institute took notice. This nonprofit organization, dedicated to promoting ethical practices in artificial intelligence, had been searching for someone who could bridge the gap between technical expertise and moral authority. Naya's combination of MIT credentials, industry experience, and proven courage made her the perfect candidate. They offered her the position of Senior Fellow for AI Safety and Ethics, with a mandate to develop new frameworks for ethical technology development. The role came with research funding, a team of graduate students, and the freedom to pursue the work she believed mattered most. Her first initiative was the Ethics First program, a comprehensive training system for engineers that emphasized safety considerations at every stage of development. Instead of treating ethics as an afterthought, her curriculum integrated moral reasoning into technical design from day one. But her most impactful work happened in the classroom and conference halls, where she mentored the next generation. Young Black women in engineering programs sought her out, inspired by seeing someone who looked like them refuse to compromise their principles for corporate approval. "Don't let them convince you that being thorough is being difficult," she would tell her mentees. "Don't let them make you believe that caring about consequences is being negative. Your perspective isn't a burden. It's a superpower. The tech industry needs people who ask uncomfortable questions." Her influence rippled outward. Students she mentored went on to leadership positions at major tech companies, armed with both technical skills and ethical frameworks. They implemented inclusive design practices, challenged biased algorithms, and created safer products, because they had learned to see technology through multiple perspectives. Companies began changing their hiring practices, recognizing that diversity wasn't just about fairness, it was about survival. The Electra One disaster had proven that homogeneous thinking could cost billions and destroy lives. Naya's individual act of courage had sparked something larger than corporate reform or regulatory changes. She had helped create a movement that fundamentally altered how the tech industry thought about responsibility, safety, and the voices that matter most. The woman who had been fired for caring too much had become the leader of a generation that would never stop caring enough. Naya's courage created a cascade of change that fundamentally transformed the tech industry's approach to safety and accountability. Within 18 months of the Electra One disaster, Congress passed the Autonomous Vehicle Safety Transparency Act, requiring companies to publicly disclose all internal safety assessments before product launches. The legislation, dubbed Naya's Law by advocates, mandated that any employee raising safety concerns must receive formal response and documentation. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration implemented new testing requirements specifically addressing the sensor fusion failures Naya had identified. Every autonomous vehicle manufacturer now had to demonstrate performance in the exact low-light, high-speed scenarios that had caused the fatal crash. Whistleblower protections were strengthened across the entire technology sector. The Corporate Accountability in Technology Act created federal protections for employees reporting safety violations, algorithmic bias, or ethical concerns. Companies faced severe penalties for retaliating against workers who raised legitimate technical objections. Major tech companies overhauled their hiring and retention practices. Google, Microsoft, and Apple launched initiatives specifically designed to recruit and retain Black women in technical roles. More importantly, they restructured decision-making processes to ensure diverse voices had genuine influence, not just token representation. The venture capital world took notice. Investment firms began requiring portfolio companies to demonstrate diverse leadership teams and ethical review processes. The message was clear. Homogeneous thinking was a liability, not an asset. Nia's influence continued growing through her work at the Distributed AI Research Institute. Her ethics-first curriculum became the gold standard for engineering education. Universities worldwide adopted her frameworks for integrating moral reasoning into technical training. Her research on bias detection algorithms became required reading in AI development courses. The ripple effects extended beyond technology. Medical device companies implemented more rigorous testing on diverse patient populations. Financial institutions examined their algorithms for discriminatory lending practices. Social media platforms hired ethics teams with real authority to override profit-driven decisions. Perhaps most importantly, a new generation of engineers entered the workforce with fundamentally different values. They had learned from Nia's example that technical excellence meant nothing without moral courage. They understood that their greatest contribution wasn't making technology faster or cheaper. It was making it safer and more equitable. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Bias and discrimination persisted throughout the industry. But the conversation had permanently shifted. Companies could no longer dismiss ethical concerns as political correctness or business obstacles. Safety had become a competitive advantage, not a regulatory burden. Nia's story proved a universal truth. Innovation without accountability cannot stand. Technology built on shortcuts and silenced voices will eventually collapse under the weight of its own contradictions. The companies that thrived were those that learned to listen to inconvenient truths from unlikely messengers. Subscribe for more stories of courage that changed the world. Because real change happens when ordinary people refuse to stay quiet about extraordinary injustices. When the final accounting was done, Electra Drive's $2 billion loss seemed enormous. Stock analysts called it one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in Silicon Valley history. Financial headlines focused on the devastation to shareholders, the ruined executive careers, the bankruptcy proceedings. But they were measuring the wrong thing. The real cost wasn't the money Electra Drive lost, it was the lives that would have been lost if Nia had stayed silent. Her courage prevented hundreds of potential crashes. The safety reforms triggered by her warnings saved families from devastating phone calls, children from growing up without parents, communities from preventable tragedies. Every autonomous vehicle that now operates with improved sensor fusion carries a piece of her moral courage in its code. Nia's legacy isn't measured in corporate damage, but in lives protected. The students she mentored are building safer algorithms. The engineers inspired by her story are challenging dangerous shortcuts. The policies created in response to her warnings are preventing the next generation of technological disasters. But this story isn't just about one exceptional woman in Silicon Valley. It's about the ethical voices in every workplace, every industry, every community who see problems others ignore and face the choice between comfort and conscience. You might work in healthcare, where someone needs to speak up about patient safety protocols. You might be in finance, where algorithmic bias is affecting loan approvals. You might be in education, where technology implementations are leaving some students behind. You might be anywhere that power tries to silence inconvenient truths. The question isn't whether you'll face that moment. It's what you'll do when you do. Will you find reasons to stay quiet? Will you convince yourself that someone else will speak up? Will you protect your career over your conscience? Or will you remember Dr. Nia Calloway, who lost everything to save people she would never meet? Supporting ethical voices doesn't require grand gestures. It means listening when colleagues raise concerns instead of dismissing them as troublemakers. It means amplifying marginalized perspectives instead of letting them be overlooked. It means asking hard questions about whether your organization's practices match its stated values. Sometimes the most expensive lesson is the one you refuse to learn. Electrodrive learned this truth at the cost of $2 billion and multiple lives. The tech industry learned it through congressional hearings and shattered reputations. But the lesson extends far beyond Silicon Valley boardrooms. Every organization, every leader, every individual who chooses short-term comfort over long-term integrity pays this price eventually. The only question is whether they'll learn before or after the damage becomes irreversible. Dr. Nia Calloway's story proves that one determined voice can change history. Her refusal to compromise on safety transformed an entire industry. Her courage to speak truth to power saved countless lives. Her willingness to sacrifice her career for her principles created a legacy that will protect generations. The most powerful technology isn't artificial intelligence or autonomous vehicles. It's moral courage. And that technology is available to everyone. What voice will you be? Like and subscribe to hear more stories that matter. Because the world needs more people willing to pay the price of standing up.